in Guangzhou in China are now complaining that Chinese authorities in the city have subjected them to forced evictions, arbitrary quarantines and mass coronavirus testing as the country seeks to contain cases of imported infections. China, however, says that while it has managed to contain the spread of local infections, there have been cases linked to the Nigerian community in the city that have sparked the alleged discrimination by locals and officials charged with the prevention of infections. Authorities say that Guangzhou had confirmed 114 imported coronavirus cases as of Thursday, 16 of which were Africans. The rest were returning Chinese nationals. Media reports indicate that several Africans have been forcibly evicted from their homes and turned away by hostels. Video footage shared on social media showed Africans sleeping on the streets. Like many countries across the world, China has banned foreign nationals from entering the country, and many travelers are being sent into 14-day quarantine. Letters from Kenya and Sierra Leone Foreign Affairs Ministry expressed concern about the recent cases of racist abuse and sought an explanation from Chinese authorities. The virus was first reported in China last year. Kenyans in China have asked their government to evacuate them due to a rise in cases of racism, but authorities in Kenya have not positively responded to those requests.
Hello, family. This is African Esquire TV, and I'm your host, Tierney Cherie. I'm going to cover this story coming out of China of people who are African being targeted by the Chinese people there for the coronavirus, which is ironic because we know that the coronavirus started in China, not in Africa. Before I do get to the story, though, really quickly, I am wearing a shirt, and I just want to give some publicity to a brother in our organization. He started a campaign called Politically Urban, and they are really passionate about seeking solutions for the community. And so he asked whether or not I'd be willing to wear one of his shirts to help bring promo to his organization. And I do support Black business, so I was more than willing to do that. So if you want to get more information on his company and their initiative, it's politicallyurban.com. Again, this is one of the shirts that they are selling. They have a number of products that they are selling, and so if you want to support a Black brother, please do so. All right, so let's get into this story. Now, I'm reading from CNN. The title of the article is Africans in, I know I'm going to mispronounce this, Guangzhou, that's my guess, are on the edge after many are left homeless amid rising xenophobia as China fights a second wave of the coronavirus. It says the African community in Guangzhou is on the edge after widespread accounts being shared on social media of people being left homeless this week as China's warnings against imported coronavirus cases stoke anti-foreigner sentiment. Now, this is just so ironic, like so ironic. In the southern Chinese city, Africans have been evicted from their homes by their landlords and turned away from hotels despite claiming to have no recent travel history or known contact with COVID-19 patients. CNN interviewed more than 24 Africans living in Guangzhou, many of whom told of the same experiences, being left without a home, being subject to random testing for COVID-19, and being quarantined for 14 days in their home, despite having no symptoms or contact with known patients. Health authorities in Guangzhou's province and the Guangzhou Public Security Bureau did not respond to CNN's report. Okay, I don't care about that. So Guangzhou has had the largest African community in China because many Africans in the city have short-term business visas. They travel to China several times a year, making it difficult to calculate the size of the African population of the city. But in 2017, 320,000 Africans entered or left China through Guangzhou, according to, I don't know how to pronounce this. African residents say that local hostility to their presence is nothing new. But when the coronavirus cases emerged in the African community this month, it served to amplify tensions. A report on April 4th alleged that a Nigerian national with COVID-19 had attacked a Chinese nurse who tried to stop him from leaving an isolation ward at the Guangzhou hospital. The report was shared widely on social media, and local African CNN spoke to a racist backlash against the African community that followed. Um, and that's kind of ironic when you think about the history of racist tension, whether it's I was looking up the history of some racist attacks from back in the day in China, I think like the 80s, and there was one incident where there were students who were accused of assaulting a Chinese woman, and because of that, all of this, racial attacks and race riots were unleashed on the African people. But it's funny that it's always like this fear of Black people hurting a woman of other cultures, whether it's a white woman, and in this instance, it's a Chinese woman, and why that's used, that fear, why that's used to allow racist, violent attacks on African people. And it goes back to the history of racism, the idea that Africans are not human, the idea that Africans are not civilized, and that Africans pose a danger to women of other cultures. This is something that has historically been used. So it's ironic because we're used to seeing it, at least I'm used to seeing it, as I'm obviously based in the United States, in the context of, you hear of a story of, let's say, there's a accusation of a Black man raping a white woman, and then, historically, what does this lead to? Racist mobs attacking not only the Black man, who more times than not, although it's hard to actually prove because a lot of these things are way back in history, but we know that more times than not, this person was innocent, did not commit these crimes. And I would say almost always they were innocent. However, this accusation wasn't even unleashed against the one person. They would use that one isolated incident, even let's say it did happen. Let's say that a Black man did assault a white woman. They would use that one incident to unleash complete mayhem on the entire Black community, which lets you know that that's not what the trigger was, or that's not what the origin was. The origin of the attacks was other feelings. For example, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, we know that the origins was jealousy. They were jealous of the fact that the African community in Tulsa was able to build something that was self-reliant, that was independent from the white power structure, and that flourished beyond what the white population in that area did. Because of that, they would use a allegation or a so-called attack on one person, one woman, to excuse race riots against the whole Black community. So that's, what's happening here. They have an allegation, and who knows if this is true, of a Nigerian assaulting a nurse, a Chinese nurse. And because of that one story, they're going to unleash all types of attacks, all types of just dangerous actions that are going to put African people at risk during a pandemic. They're going to do all of this because that really wasn't the issue. The issue was the already existing tension between the African community there and the Asian community there. All right, so, or the Chinese community, sorry. So fearing a cluster among the African community, Guangzhou authorities upgraded risk level in the areas and from low to medium, and the local government reported 111 imported cases of COVID-19 in Guangzhou, with 28 patients from the UK, 18 from the US. And I bet you they will not do these types of things, start evicting Americans or British people, but we know why. And then in response to an increase in infections, the Guangzhou metropolitan area escalated scrutiny of foreign nationals. As part of its campaign, police ordered bars and restaurants not to serve clients who appear to be of African origin. And this, the more I read this, it's like, where does this even come from? Like, we know Africa right now is not the epicenter of the coronavirus, although they're projecting that it's going to be bad. So far, it's nothing like they've been projecting. But it's not the origin. It's not where it's Africa is the safest place to be in the world right now as far as the coronavirus, ironically. And yet somehow this virus gets turned into an African problem. I still don't understand that. When you have people like Bill Gates talking about, oh, we have to hurry up and do something for Africa. And meanwhile, at that point, I don't even know if there was a coronavirus case in Africa, and they're already talking about this is an African problem. How is this an African problem when this originated in China? The country getting hit the hardest right now is the US, and of course the region getting hit the hardest is Europe. And yet this becomes an African problem. And we know that this is always going to happen in situations like this, because when you're inside of a country like China, which has a long history of being hostile towards African people, I honestly don't know. I don't know the incentive. Maybe there's like some type of business or whatever, but the incentive to put yourself inside of that type of hostility, because I've just heard so many, I've talked about on this channel so many stories of, in particular, Nigerians. I noticed a lot of stories of them getting killed or getting beaten. And a lot of it's just not uncommon at this point. We know that this is a big risk that you're taking, and it's unfortunate, but it's prevalent. And the fact that we are here again, seeing African people being beat for something, or being hurt, or being evicted, or oppressed and discriminated for something, and this doesn't even have anything to do with Africans. It's beyond me, the justification that people in their minds can have for these types of things, but it's not uncommon by now. And to me, we should understand that this is business as usual when it comes to our people. So let me just finish this section. All right, so local officials launched a round of mandatory tests for COVID-19, followed by mandatory self-quarantine for anyone with African contacts, regardless of recent travel history or quarantine. I still don't get how this became an African problem. It says African Americans have also reported that some businesses and hotels refuse to do business with them, which I thought that part was really funny, because of course African Americans, they're not going to refuse to do business with you. Some of us still believe the hype that we're different or we're separate from Africans, and this is why I talk about these stories so much, because I need for us to understand that this is a global problem. White supremacy is not something that we're exempt from, depending on what country we're from. And in this instance, racism in China is not going to be, when they say we're targeting Africans, they're not exempting you because you claim African American or you claim American. That's not the case. Anyone of African descent, you are a target inside of the system of global white supremacy. And that's why we talk about Pan-Africanism. That's why we talk about that's the only solution. Because when you wake up to the fact that everyone else in the world knows this, everyone else in the world knows that you're connected. And the reason why you know that they know that you're connected is because you're treated the same everywhere else you go in the world. As soon as you wake up to that, that's when things change. As soon as all of us wake up to that it's not an individual problem. It's not a Nigerian problem. It's not a Ghanaian problem. It's not a South African problem. It's not a Kenyan problem. It's not a Jamaican problem. It's not an African American problem. This is a global system of white supremacy. So I think I'm gonna leave that story at this point. But the thing that was ironic about this is, number one, I think all of us have probably been on the internet, or if you're lucky, maybe you haven't been, but a lot of us who have, we've noticed there have been stories about Asian Americans being discriminated against or being targeted. And I've noticed a lot of people accusing Black people of targeting Asian Americans. Now, a lot of people were critical of Black people who jumped to the defense of people of Asian descent. I was not offended at all. To me, if you see something wrong, call it out. I don't care if it's someone who's Black, white, or whatever. If you see something wrong and you want to speak out about it, if you're that type of person, like some people, they see things wrong and they're not that type of person to go out of their way to speak out about it. So whatever. But if you're that type of person who you see something, or you feel like you have to speak out for everyone, you want to speak out for everyone, fine. But make sure that you are consistent in that, especially when it comes to your own community. Because the ironic thing was, do these same people who jumped on the internet and condemned Black people or condemned attacks against people who are of Asian descent, do they feel the same way about their own people? Do they talk about the fact that whenever our people are killed, it seems like every other community in America is silent, while our people are the only ones begging the white power structure to please stop killing us? And then we talk about the fact that there is a long history, and I've covered this in a video on my channel, of Asian stores, not just Asian, but Asians are the primary ones who own a lot of the hair stores, African American hair stores. There's a long history of attacks happening to Black women inside of these stores. There's a long history of attacks happening to Black women in nail salons that were owned by Asians. If you're going to speak out against what was happening from the COVID-19 as far as Asians being targeted, fine. But make sure you're consistent and make sure you're also speaking out whenever it's your own people. In fact, I don't know why you wouldn't be more passionate about your own self-preservation and make sure that you always amplify your cause before you amplify the cause of someone else. That's just common sense. That's just common sense self-preservation. Unfortunately, our people, which is, this whole situation playing over and over again, our people have been programmed not to care about self-preservation. How do I know this? Because every single day I'm hearing stories about Black boys being killed, Black girls being killed, Black women being killed, Black men being killed. And I hardly see a reaction to people who look like us being killed. However, for some reason, if the dynamics change, for example, if it's a white person that kills a Black person, our dynamics change and we start amplifying it more. But not to the degree that it should be amplified, because I notice a lot of passivity surrounding the police brutality issue more now that we see that results aren't happening as a result to our protests. But we care more for some reason when it's someone that doesn't look like us that kills us. And then we certainly care more when someone that doesn't look like us is killed. Why are we like this? Where did this come from? And of course, this is a symptom of slavery and colonialism. I say them both together because, number one, we know that the system of slavery was a form of colonialism. And we know that colonialism is still existent in the US. And then, of course, colonialism is a global phenomenon. Everywhere where there's significant African populations, you're going to find that those populations are colonized, whether they be in Africa, whether they be in Haiti, whether they be anywhere. We're all facing a system of colonization. So what happens again, over and over again, is that we're numb to our own oppression. We're numb to people dying who look like us. But when it's someone else dying, we're not numb. We've essentially bought into the narrative that the media has taught us, that Black lives are dispensable, that they're not worth preserving. And we perpetuate those things by these actions. That's why we have to care about the things that we say or the way that we address things, because while it might not seem like a big deal to you, someone who would go out and be very vocal about the attacks against Asian Americans, but not feel the same push or the same angst about attacks against their own people. The fact is that when we participate in those behaviors, when we're not practicing self-preservation, when we're perpetuating the idea that we should care about these people and not our people, this is just a continuance of the slave mindset that has been impressed on our people. And we're not doing anything to change that. We're not doing anything to challenge it. That's why we have to challenge these things. That's why we have to speak out against people who are so selective about their outrage. So back to the story at hand, though, we know that this is what happens. Unfortunately, everywhere in the world with African people, we're all subject to oppression. We're all subject to discrimination. So this is something I commonly say, but until we're organized, there's going to be no way that we can be protected wherever you are. Because notice, you would never hear about, for example, people who are of Asian descent being attacked by Africans, and the Chinese government just not doing anything. But has the Nigerian government, since this now is a Nigerian who sparked it all, or has any African government come out and condemned the attacks against their people? No, because again, we're not organized for our benefit. the governments that exist in Africa are organized for the benefit of the Western elite and for the benefit of the Asian elite. They're not organized for the benefit of the people, which is why we should question the necessity of these governments. We should question the continuance of these governments because they're built on the idea that African resources and things surrounding the African policies are not going to be for African people, but they're going to be for an outside people. These are situations that we have to challenge. So all this to say, we're not surprised, obviously, but this is another reason, and I keep saying we have to organize and organize and organize. This is another reason why we have to realize the importance of organizing as a people. So that's all I have to say on this. What are your guys' thoughts? I've covered stories like this before. I'm sorry if I don't seem more revved up, but I've covered a number of stories of Africans being attacked in China, so this just isn't a surprise at this point. But is this your personal first time learning this? I know it's crazy this time because it's like, of all things to attack us for, you want to attack us for the COVID-19 issue that started in China, which is hilarious because that's like me that's like you coming to my house and all my family's sick, and because you're in my house, now I'm going to start attacking you because my family's sick, which doesn't make any logical sense. But we know racism isn't based on logic. We know racism, in my opinion, is based on greed and insecurity. But you know, this is the situations that have continued in our community, unfortunately. So that's all I have in this video, you guys. I will see you all in the next.